So it's now my pleasure to introduce the political panel. Our first panelist is Assemblyman Vince Fong. Vince represents the 34th Assembly. Which encompasses most of Kern County. Vince has helped lead dialogue on energy independence in California and worked to develop policies that permit business expansion while enhancing job opportunities for local residents. A lifelong resident of Kern County, Vince earned his bachelor's degree from UCLA and his master's degree from Princeton University. Welcome, Vince. Thanks for joining us. Our next panelist is Kern County's 2nd District Supervisor, Zach Scrivener. Zach's priorities are private sector job growth in the areas of aerospace, alternative and conventional energy, manufacturing and logistics, as well as tough fiscal management of taxpayer dollars in county government. Ladies and gentlemen. And our third is final, and next to final panelist is Ted Gaines, member of the Board of Equalization, the 1st District, which I learned last night covers 30 counties in California. It's a massive district. A leading taxpayer advocate, Ted is committed to providing trustworthy and transparent representation for 30 counties of the 1st District. Prior to his election, Ted served 12 years in the state legislature. In addition to his public service, he is also a successful small business owner, having owned Gaines Insurance for more than 30 years. Ladies and gentlemen, Ted Gaines. Okay. I guess makes it easy. When Shannon gets here, we'll add her to the group here. So, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. Now, just to be fair, what we've done here is I sent out some questions, and I got 0 feedback on the questions, so I assume that means everybody read them and agrees that they're okay, which is fantastic. So what we're going to do is I've given them some questions, and I will ask a panelist a question, and hoping that others that may have a slightly different view will speak up. The other thing that Sherry helped out with is we solicited some questions from other members of the audience ahead of time. It's a relatively short panel discussion, and I'll intersperse questions with the author of the question as we go through, because there are actually some very, very good ones from the audience. And I thank you all for those that participated in that process ahead of time. Okay, so let's go with Vince, if that's all right.
Sure,
Perfect.
Absolutely.
All right. This is a little bit of a lengthy one, but it does kind of go to the rule of law concept. And I think I mentioned death by 1,000 cuts, which if you follow the Colorado stuff that's going on, that's what's happening to the industry there. So having some politicians involved in this process, I don't like to die by 1,000 cuts. I kind of like to either put an end to it or survive, and I obviously would rather survive. So that's the context here. There are between 15 and 20 bills being considered in the current session, okay, that have a negative impact on the oil and gas industry. About 4 in the Senate, the remainder in the Assembly. Some of them have minor immediate impact, the death by 1,000 cuts, and some have significant impact, such as SB 246, the severance tax, and AB 1441. Which I'll just say redefines the Dogger role, or in vernacular, cuts the legs out of Dogger, okay, which is probably not a good thing for the industry or the state. All of them taken together will continue to take away the viability of the industry in California. All but a couple are being sponsored by representatives from the coast, LA through San Francisco, and obviously not anyone on the panel today. As a representative of one of the largest oil and gas producing districts in the state, how do you stop this death by 1,000 cuts? How do you think we can sustain the industry with the emotion and momentum of the green movement that is happening all around us? Vince.
Wow. Well, first, thank you for having me, and thank you for Taft College for putting this on. So we are in a difficult situation in the state of California, especially someone who represents Kern County and the oil patch. I'm proud to do so, and I think we need to build a coalition, and we're trying to feed all these these measures, but we have to build a coalition bigger than we've ever built before. So in the past, it was always, well, we're going to rally our industry and we're going to rally our community to defeat these bills, and try to educate members on the consequences to if these bills ever became law. But it's no longer that we can just say we're going to rely on our original allies. So we have to figure out how we get new voices to join our coalition. And when you look at the impacts that these bills will have, in essentially putting an entire industry that powers our state and our nation out of business, the consequences are dire. And so, you know, when we look at the importance of our oil industry, you know, they support our schools, they support our law enforcement, they support our nonprofits. And so when we are trying to defeat the oil severance tax, for example, the most powerful voices that we had in defeating the oil severance tax is our local nonprofits. You know, the oil industry supports our homeless centers, and they support our programs to help those who are victims of domestic violence. And so having those voices out there are powerful voices for us to show a different light. Well, we need to provide certainty in our state to those who do produce oil. And so, yes, taxes, regulations, the level of uncertainty that exists in the state of California, it is a difficult time to do business in California. And that's not just specific to oil. But I think the broader message that we have to articulate is the one of affordability. I think everyone in the state of California, especially those who are in the audience, no one believes that it's affordable to live and work in our state. And so that is the lens that we have to get everyone to view these policies from. So energy costs are clearly a critical component of that. And so when we talk about bills like these, the lens that I want to get legislators to view these bills through is, does this bill or do these regulations or do these concepts, does it make things more affordable in the state? And when it comes to energy, it clearly doesn't. It's going to make it more difficult to produce. It's going to increase prices of fuel. It's going to be increasing prices of products that need to be delivered through transportation means of trucking and other forms that require energy costs. And so that's kind of the game plan at the moment. But I will end with, I'll just throw this out there, and this may lead to another question, but we are in a unique time right now in the state of California because we have a new governor. We have new legislators. The governor is appointing new people to agencies. And so we are going through this period where we're trying to feel each other out and see, all right, who is Gavin Newsom and how is he going to govern? Who is he appointing to these agencies, and can we work with them? Are they pragmatic? Are they common sense? Or are they progressive and out of touch, in my opinion, to the needs of ordinary people? And of course, we have new legislators, and we're trying to figure out and educate how are these new legislators coming into the Capitol, and how are they going to vote in many instances.
Just as a follow-up on that, when do you think you're going to have a view? When does clarity occur, if ever? Clarity comes when people start voting. We are going through the committee process before. There are a lot of new legislators now that say, I'm going to keep an open mind, I'm going to listen, I want to gather all the facts. But when you have to hit that red or green button, you are no longer learning. You have to make a decision. And so those are so when it comes down to that, that's when we're going to know where these individuals are going to be, how they're going to view these issues. And of course, we're working with the governor. We're trying to understand where he's coming from. A lot of the appointees that he's made, that he's surrounded himself with, we're concerned about. There are a few bright spots in terms of individuals that we can work with, but the jury's still out on this governor in terms of how he is going to interact with an industry that is important to the state of California, like oil. Great. Zach or Ted, do you have anything to add to Vince's comments? You don't have to.
I think in terms of the education aspect, that's critical. And within the legislative environment, the ability to take electeds on tours so that they understand what's happening here in Kern County and how critical it is to the state. how critical it is in terms of the cost of energy. I took a trip recently with my wife to Idaho, landed in Boise, and gas was like 70 to 80 cents less a gallon. You ask the question, why is this? It's government that is creating a taxation system that makes it very difficult for Californians. We take a look at our energy costs just in general and how high they are here in California relative to a state like Idaho or just about any other state in the union. And so that education aspect of legislators and understanding that it's going to be their constituents that are impacted directly, hopefully resonates with them when they're making their votes.
From my perspective, at the county level, we, every time a piece of legislation comes out, like the oil severance tax, we just did it last week. We always take a position in opposition to things like that, and try to lend our local voice to the efforts of Vince and Shannon and others that are up on the state level that are fighting for us. But when I was the first time I was chairman of the board, I think it was 2012, and I went up to Sacramento to fight against the oil tax. I testified in committee, and it's an uphill battle. You're in there, and it's the Democratic majority. They have 2/3 at the time they had 2/3 of the seats on that committee panel. It's probably worse now, as the numbers have dwindled. And you can tell that you're speaking passionately for the industry that is the largest contributor to your economy, your local economy, and your tax base, and it's falling on deaf ears with most of the folks that are in the majority party that are on the panel. And it's frustrating, and it's a little bit defeating, but we continue to go up and do the drill, so to speak. But I think where we can make inroads and where we have made inroads is with some of the more moderate Democrats that are up there in Sacramento, hoping that we can talk to them about the impacts that these kinds of policies have on the statewide economy, and also just our ability to provide energy for food and for transportation, and not to mention all the products that are made with oil products. But I was speaking with a couple of folks from the oil industry earlier this week, and I think it's important that we continue to educate our youth, our young people, starting with the youngest levels, but high school, getting them to understand what the oil industry really is. I remember as a parent, one of the most shocking things that I saw was when my kindergartner came home with a piece of homework that had one column that said, these are things that are helpful, these are things that are harmful. And cars was one of the things in the column that were harmful. What our kids are learning, unfortunately, in today's education system is not good, and it's not reality, but unfortunately it's something that we're faced with. When I look at the attack that the oil industry is under in Sacramento on a constant basis, to be quite honest with you, that's what has motivated us to try to diversify our economy here in Kern County. And it's the oil industry, we love it, we support it, we do everything we can. Yeah, I think it's about 11% of our tax base, but we recognize that it is at risk, and we have to do everything we can to try and support in recognizing that between oil and agriculture with SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, those two industries are continuing to be stressed by policies coming out of Sacramento, and so we look at ways that we can diversify the economy just to respond to it. And it's not a great rosy picture, but it's something that we do take seriously.
Very good. Actually, that leads, I was wondering what my second question was going to be, Zach, and you volunteered without knowing it, maybe. Which is, one of the, and this is a generalization, but a lot of the bills that we're talking about come from those that aren't from producing areas. Similarly, Kern County has a lot of renewables because it's sunny here and there's some wind. And a lot of the folks on the coast, that's not necessarily the case, where there's the area, the space for solar farms, and et cetera. So, your district has a lot of renewable that contributes significantly to the state mandate. What is it, 60% by 2030. So what are your thoughts on reaching this in the county? The potential loss to the county property tax, if there is any, from the loss of oil. Just follow on to your comment, which is, by the way, most oil people, if they've got their head out of the sand, understand and do support diversity of energy supply.
Right.
One thing people don't realize, a couple of things. One is that the nuclear industry in the world is doing just fine. The only place you don't see nuclear plants being built is actually the United States. So it's interesting as diversity of interest in energy sources. So.
But the premise of the question is one that I think a lot of people and myself would take issue with respectfully. Is that it's not mutually exclusive.
That's
It's
right.
not mutually exclusive to say that you can't do renewables with petroleum. I mean, if you're looking at the energy policy and what it should be not only in California and the United States, Kern County is the model of that. We are the #1 oil producing county in America. We are the #1 renewable producing energy county in America. And so the largest wind farms, the largest solar farms, Glass Point here is a great example in this partnership with ERA. And so I think that's the piece we're trying to say, is that you can do it all, and we need to do it all. If our economy is going to continue to grow, if there's this looming recession that is out there that we have to prepare for as a state, the one thing that we need to do is to actually reduce the cost of energy and make it more sustainable, reliable, and cheaper. And to do that is we need all of it. And I think that's the point that we're going to make. But the fight that we're in is real. These are not thought exercises. We have an oil severance tax debate that is going on that we have to fight back. There is a bill out there to ban the gas combustion engine. That is not a thought exercise. That bill exists, and we have to defeat it. So to say that somehow we're all going to sit on the sidelines and say, well, common sense will prevail. Well, right now, common sense is not very common in Sacramento. And so that's the point that I'm trying to impart on people, is that decisions are made with or without us. And we have to be in the room when those decisions are made. And there are two audiences. We are one audience in terms of the legislature and elected officials, but there's a public audience. And the public is our boss. And so we have to take the gloves off, and we have to persuade people and articulate a message and educate the public at large to go to our legislators and say, these guys need to listen to us because we're the ones paying the bills. And we can't afford to live in this state, and our electricity bills are going higher, our gas prices are going higher, everything is getting more expensive, and it's Sacramento that's sticking it to us. And so you need to change, and we deserve better.
Excellent. And just
That was my soapbox, I apologize.
Well, by all means, you can get on a higher soapbox if you want to. But just to be clear, I was maybe not very clearly, but advocating that.
No, absolutely.
The diversity of the energy sources is critical to the survival of affordable energy.
Absolutely.
And where it makes sense. So
Absolutely.
It's perfectly, the oil and gas industry cannot afford to say it's us or them. It's because that's not the way it works. Just like, you know.
And the oil and gas industry is proving that you can do it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Okay.
you spoke about my district, and yes, my district, District 2, it includes the Eastern Kern Desert, Tehachapi, Mojave, and we have the largest solar farm in the world. We have more wind turbines in our county than any other county in the United States, and now with the redistricting that occurred at the county level, my district now includes a tremendous amount of oil as well, and I'm very, very proud of the fact that I think my district, the 2nd District, is the energy capital of California, of course, but I think we rival just about anywhere in the entire United States. And I think it's important for us as a county to be an all of the above energy county, where that's our approach, that we embrace any type of energy production because of the jobs that it produces. The state has put policies in place that have mandated a certain amount of renewable energy in every provider's portfolio. And you can look at that and say, well, that is engineering a market, And I wouldn't disagree with that. It does. When you put those incentives in place, it does engineer a renewable energy market. But I think that that is going to be the case whether Kern County takes advantage of it or not. And we have taken full advantage of those policies, and the jobs and the tax base that we have built is a testament to our eagerness to find ways in which we can take advantage of a situation when it's presented to us. And we owe that to our taxpayers, we owe that to our citizens, I believe, to provide an environment where all sorts of businesses can thrive. And we continue to do that. You know, unfortunately, the state has not assessed solar for property tax like it has for wind, and it does for oil, and so that is one component that is missing when it comes to the benefits from solar. But we do still continue to see a tremendous amount of jobs that are created from it. And as I said, the challenge that we continue to see is, you know, the fact that some of our traditional industries have been under attack and continue to be under attack, and so we have to look at ways that we can adapt and grow our economy however we think that we can do so. But I do believe, though, that when we are up in Sacramento, not so much talking to the state legislators, but I think when you're talking to the bureaucrats that are in various state agencies that we have to deal with, the fact that Kern County has embraced renewable energy, the fact that we are the leader in the state when it comes to renewable energy, I think that lends credibility to our arguments when we talk about our oil industry. Because, you know, we're not just a singular focused, we don't have just a singular focused perspective, but we're multifaceted. And so when we do go up, when we deal with various agencies up there, I think that they recognize that, and I think that it helps us when we're arguing for the oil industry because we've done so much with renewable.
Okay, very good. Welcome, Shannon.
Thank you.
And, we're talking obviously about a lot of the themes that are going on. This is a very eclectic audience in terms of lots of industry, generally supporters, and lots of students around the side. So there's a vested interest in oil and gas. There are some current situations in California which are worthy of conversation in terms of how we proceed. Okay, so I'm sure you're fluent in all this, so it's much appreciated. And I would like to go to a question with you, if that's all right.
Sure.
Okay, great. We had commented that in California, it's isolated from the rest of the country in terms of access to oil in particular. No pipelines coming in. It's an island that way. And that the production internally has gone down over the years, and the reliance on overseas, Middle Eastern and South American crude in particular, as Alaska has declined, is growing to, and we talked to about 2/3 of our daily needs. Okay, so there's people call it different things, but a security issue possibly, let alone a potential environmental issue, which is that's a lot of oil coming in every day into our ports. So with that, what sort of solutions do you see? And we've talked a bit about renewables. We've talked about the benefit that the country can come to with a blend of renewables and oil and gas working together to provide affordable energy. So what kind of solutions would you see that California could do if there, as Vince was pointing out, if there was more common sense commonly distributed in Sacramento, what kind of things could we see California actually do to reduce the dependence on foreign oil?
So I appreciate that question. Thank you. And it is very frustrating being in Sacramento, especially representing 75% of the state's oil. So 75% of the oil that's produced in California is what we have the opportunity to represent. When we deal with the people that we deal with in the state of California, our colleagues, it's frustrating that they don't see the amazing opportunities that we have with the oil industry. There is going to be a huge attack on oil this year. There already has. You've got legislation that was passed a few years ago that are going to eliminate fossil fuels or energy production in the oil industry by reduce it significantly by 2030 and 2045. They've already got legislation that's available for the oil severance tax. We all know that we have a Laram tax, and the oil severance tax is going to be something that we'll have to fight again this year. There's also AB 937. It's a lot of us in the oil and energy industry have gone out to work with agricultural, our partners in the Central Valley, because they have a lack of water over the last few years. And of course you have SGMA and other things that are restricting water for agriculture. And so the oil industry has come together with agriculture to use produced water that's been very clean, whether it's the Coela Water District project, whether it's what EMB is doing with a couple of organizations, and Chevron is working with a couple of farming organizations as well, whether it's Uriosics. But to produce clean water out of production water and allow it to be used for agriculture. Their AB 937 will require you to get permission from the Science and Technology Council, which is about a 3.5 to 4 year waiting process if that bill passes, for you to continue that. And I know there's been a lot of investment in this type of technology over the last couple of years. Moving forward, I mean, let's just have a real conversation. The Republicans in that building, there are 80 assembly members, and there are 19 Republicans. And those of you that stand around and say that you want to support mod Democrats, there is not a mod Democrat in that building. They are continually going to the left, and they are continually supporting legislation that moves to the left. To eliminate fossil fuels, the cheapest, safest, reliable energy that we have, does create a domestic security threat. And I would hope that the federal administration would step in and help us. We have done a poor job, and I'm not trying to be negative, but we have done a poor job about putting the face on the oil industry. There has been a recent change in that over the last, I say, probably 15 months. And they've started putting a face, and there's a wonderful commercial about second chancers, individuals who have gone to prison and have an opportunity to come to the oil industry with very, very little education, but have good soft skills, and you can teach them a trade and they can change lives. Jerry Flores is a perfect example of that. His son just went off to college, and it's the first person in his entire family that has ever made it to college. And Jerry is a second chancer that works for EMB Natural Resources. We employ single moms, we employ veterans. There's a great commercial out, like I said, that's been put together, and we need to work on putting a face on the oil industry in Sacramento. The more diversity that we can put on that face, because they do care about gender politics and they care about diversity in politics, the more diversity that we can put on that face is going to be beneficial to us. So as far as solutions, the first thing we have to do is change the number of seats in the House. That's all there is to it. We have to change the numbers, and we've got to actively engage in elections. And then we're going to have to continue to fight what's coming down the pike from us for this cycle, this next 2-year cycle.
Excellent. Thank you.
I'll just say, I echo what Shannon says. Structure dictates behavior, and so clearly the makeup of the legislature will determine what gets out. We make policy in the world of politics, and so who gets elected makes a difference. Elections matter. Now, in terms of the short term, in terms of what we can do, it's clearly, as Shannon suggested, we have to rein in the state agencies. We've over time, and maybe for a number of reasons, but the state agencies have become so powerful. CARB, the State Water Board, the permit backlog that Shannon and I and a number of people have been working on for years has resurrected itself, and it happens in a cycle, right? The budget gets debated. When we hold up their money, then the agencies say, well, we're going to work with you. We're going to have to. We want to make sure that we aren't the bureaucrats that are holding everything up. And then once the budget's approved, they go back to their standard operating procedure. And so the budget is clearly the way that we hold these agencies accountable, but we have to find longer term methods where we have a little bit more leverage. And so we have bills. I introduced one last year that said, look, any major regulation in the state of California that comes from a state agency with a cost of $50 million or more to the state economy has to come to the legislature for up or down vote, right? Just makes sense. You did not vote for the board of the people on the water board. You did not vote for the people on CARB. You did not vote for someone on the 200 plus agencies that regulate the state of California. But you did vote for us, and we're accountable to you. And so if the agencies of the state of California are going to impose a regulation that's going to affect all of you, then you should allow us to be the ones to decide whether it should go into effect or not. So those are some of the ideas that we need to get done. And of course, if we were able to rein in the agencies, it would allow us to explore more, and we would be able to produce more energy. And I think that's the way that we probably need to approach it.
Great. Ted, you were over there nodding. I didn't know if...
Yeah, if I could, I just want to emphasize a comment in reference to getting the word out that Senator Grove focused on with the advertising campaign more recently. I don't think you can do enough of that. I think when we take a look at offshore oil coming into the state of California, that is an environmental risk. When we take a look at the discussions that happened in the Transportation Committee when I was in the Senate about the shipping of oil in tanker cars via rail, that was a very controversial issue. And so I think right here in Kern, you're producing the oil for the state of California. It's being delivered largely by pipeline. And so you have this great message to deliver in terms of the environmental safety of the delivery of oil in the state of California because it's homegrown. And you couple that with the fact that average income is $100,000 for a job. That is incredible. What a great message to deliver. And guess what? You could be a second chancer. You could be someone that has a high school education and have this opportunity at a great life and to be able to raise a family. And to the degree that you can deliver that, I think along with education of legislators that will at least listen, is very compelling. We had challenges in my Senate district when it had to do with timber. And so there were organized efforts by Brian Dowley and others who represented that area to make sure that people understood where their wood came from, you know, and how do you build a house, and how do we manage our forests? Because the environmentalists have largely shut that down in the state of California, and now our forests are burning up. So there are some parallels with other challenges within the state that I think could be used when it comes to energy here, especially in Kern County, and how to get that message out.
Very good, very good. I want to go two directions just based on that. One is, what can the industry do better? I have a view that we've done a terrible job over the years in helping with that message, because it's an excellent point. And then the other one is actually a question that came from Whisper Knoll from Taft here. Okay, and I'm going to intersperse with some of the some questions that came a couple days ago from the audience, and that is how students get their voice heard. Okay, and so she addresses this to you, Vince and Shannon, but also to Ted. But it really goes to all of you as representatives of this particular area. And her exact quote is, "When students contact their elected officials, does it have any effect on the decisions and voting record of that elected official? Would you give an example when students successfully persuaded you on a policy discussion?" And I don't know if there's a volunteer, or should I just point, okay, Vince, Shannon?
Well, I'll start, and Shannon may be able to add a little bit more to my comments. But students have a huge impact. I mean, Shannon and I probably have met with a number of students when it comes to the state budget, when it comes to college funding, the funding levels of the Cal State system and the UC system, and their voices are very important. And so anytime anyone comes, I will say this for myself, we know 1 inch about everything. And so if any elected official tells you they're an expert in something, they're probably lying to you. And so that 2nd inch and that 3rd inch of information that you provide us is extremely important. And so, we reflect the state of California. We come from different backgrounds. And so we have pharmacists making decisions on education. We have teachers making decisions on oil. We have, so we come from our own perspectives. And so anytime anyone comes to us with information and details, it's extremely important. And so that's kind of where I would start from, and maybe Shannon can springboard off of that. But it is important for everyone to engage in the political process and the elected process, because, as I said before, you can't assume that we know, and a lot of people do make that assumption. They say, "Oh, we assumed you knew that already." And then when you talk to elected officials, it's like, "Well, I never knew that was true." And so when we talk about, especially advocating for the oil industry, Shannon's right. When it comes to second chancers who want a chance for a new career, the petroleum industry is the one industry that is providing that for people. They can afford to buy a home in Kern County. They can afford to send their kids to college, and that's the California dream for a lot of us. And your industry is the one that's providing that dream and making that dream a reality. And of course, as I said before, when we were fighting the oil severance tax, having someone talk about, look, the beds that are provided in my domestic violence shelter is funded by charitable contributions from my local oil industry. And so if you make this industry go away, these 10 beds that are helping these victims of domestic violence are going away. It's a reality. And so if you do that to our industry, you are hurting the people that you purport to help. And it's the same thing for homelessness. It's the same thing for poverty reduction, the support that our local schools get. I mean, STEM education, all those things, the foundation of it is the local oil industry here in Kern County. So if you want to promote those things, then you should promote our oil industry.
So yeah, I agree with what Assemblymember Fong said. One of the things that we really have to do, like I said earlier, is put a face on the oil industry and oil companies that have employees and that have students that want to advocate for that. It's cheaper to get some buses. We had to haul you up to the state capitol to lobby for the oil industry and lobby against bills that come up that will be detrimental or worse or far more detrimental than what's already been passed. There was a rally at the state capitol last week, and out my office window I heard all this chanting and cheering, and I said, "What's going on down there?" And I looked out the window, and there was probably about 5,000 people there from the Charter School Association to oppose the bills that are coming through to affect charter schools. And when you look at these students, they come from all over the state, and parents, and they're all, every diversity that every race, Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter, because there are issues that cross party lines, and they came to advocate against the bills that are going through the building on charter schools. You guys in the oil industry can go up and advocate and have your students that want to participate, just give them general knowledge and information on the bills, have them meet with the committee members that are going to be hearing those bills and share with them. And like I said, the better diverse. That's not what, Kern County, that we're always labeled as this, redneck county, right? And you have just so much diversity here in Kern County, because we look at people like, with the content of their, their character and their heart, not the color of their skin. I really do believe that we have that right here in Kern County. And when you look at the state, they demand it when you go up to Sacramento. So if you want to make an impact, you have to put a face on the oil industry the way that the state legislators will view the oil industry. And what I mean by that is that you have to have people like I said earlier, the Jerry Flores, the single moms, the veterans, the students that want a career in STEM technology to develop their skills in the oil industry. You want to be able to have people that have been in Folsom Prison come out and say, look, I was in East LA and I grew up in a gang, and I dropped out of high school and I went to Folsom Prison after I was convicted of this crime, but when I got out, my probation officer told me to go to Kern County and I could get a job, and now I make $85,000 to $100,000 a year. You could have a military veteran that works in the oil industry and say, when I came back from fighting for my country in Iraq or Afghanistan, there weren't any jobs, but I got a job in the oil industry because it gave me an opportunity, because I did heavy equipment and, electronic, PLC boards, whatever, in the military, and I transitioned those skills into the oil industry. You have to put a face on it, and you have to be able to engage with those legislators in the Capitol. You have to help us help you. And so if students want to engage, they can do that. When students come into my office, just like they come into Assemblymember Fong's office, We always listen to what they have to say, and it doesn't matter, it doesn't even have to be a student, it can be anybody. We, like he said, know a little bit about a lot of things, but you guys are the experts in your industry and the experts in the field. So if you could inform us and educate us better on the issues that are coming up, especially how they affect us. Now we have general knowledge, right? We know the oil severance tax is bad, and we know that jobs are a vital part of the oil industry, and they provide economic security in Kern County. And we know, like Vince said, they fund, probably 90% of the nonprofits in the area. We know that they participate in philanthropy, and we know that they participate in many avenues. The other thing that's affected is that we've always tried to build coalitions. When you build a coalition, the problem that you have in Sacramento is that they make an amendment on a bill which carves out someone. I think realtors, car dealers, restaurants association, the oil industry should build coalitions with every type of industry that will be affected. If the oil industry shut down in Kern County, who's going to be here to buy a home? That affects real estate. The county should engage, because if nobody's buying homes and they're not producing oil and have an ad valorem tax, then the county loses revenue for schools. The education people should join a coalition, because if they don't have the funds for the education system, then students don't get educated. Parents coalitions. The car dealers, if you don't have the oil industry producing oil and providing jobs, who's going to buy cars? You just have to think about building coalitions and fighting this together, and stay unified. I mean, make a pact, sign a contract, do whatever you need to do so that you stay unified all the way to the end, because if they can't peel you off, you may not have a voice with these 3 legislators, but the realtors do. You may not have a voice with these 2 legislators, but the car dealers do. You may not have a voice with these 2 legislators, but the education department. As long as they can't peel those people off and you stay unified, you will get all those votes to stop the insanity that's going on in Sacramento to affect your industry.
Very good.
One thing that I recognize for sure is that elected officials want to be reelected. And the folks up in Sacramento that are putting these policies into place that go after the oil industry, it's because they believe that that's what their voters, their constituencies from those places like, the Bay Area and the LA Basin, that's what they think that their constituents want. I talked to, I mentioned that piece of paper, classroom work that my kindergartner brought home that time that portrayed automobiles as a harmful thing. That's the problem, I believe, is that the folks that are going through our school systems and are growing up and becoming voters have the wrong idea, a very backwards idea about this industry. And so I think that that's why it's so critical that the oil industry continues to put resources into educating the public. The fact that Kern County is the #1 place in the nation for upward social mobility, it's because of the oil industry. It's because people can get a job out of high school without a college education and make a very good living. And that's why I believe that Kern County provides that opportunity. It's because of the oil industry. But those stories, like Shannon and Vince were saying, those stories have to be told. We have to be talking to our kids about it. We have to be promoting the industry, I think, in every facet throughout the state. Because only when the constituencies of those elected officials in Sacramento change their minds, that's when the elected officials will change their mind about the industry and stop going after the industry with these types of bills. I don't know how many people know that this industry, because of the ordinance that Kern County passed back in 2015 and the environmental impact study that was a part of that, which the industry supported and came to the county and asked us to do, $50 million has gone to clean up the air in the Central Valley. This industry has paid more than any other industry in the 8 counties in the San Joaquin Valley to clean up the air. But I don't think that, I know the folks in the Bay Area don't know that. And so those are the kinds of stories I think you need to continue to tell.
Ted, on this one, you cover those 30 counties, and we were talking about that, so you see a ton, and you can start with maybe the student input, but I'd love to hear your view of the diversity of the state that way.
Sure, you bet. In terms of student input, it's critical. I think all of our offices are open for students that have questions. We want them to be engaged. We want them to understand. We want them to be critical thinkers, because maybe they're being taught only one perspective through the school system. And this gives you an opportunity to talk to the next generation. This is the hope of the future. So we want to hear your input. We want to engage you. We want to use you, have you come and help out as an intern. Typically that would be maybe for a senior or a college student, but we want you engaged. And I've got an office in Lancaster. If students are interested, we'd love to engage them in terms of what the Board of Equalization does over the assessment of certain types of property taxes. I know the legislature loves that and would love to put you through a program and teach you about how politics works and those challenges. In terms of the impact and diversity of my district, from Oregon border down to San Bernardino, it's very diverse. It's also the most awesome part of the state, I think, to represent Kern County. Extremely diverse, and the impact that you have and the ability that Kern has had in air quality related issues statewide, but in particular in San Joaquin, which has always been a challenge, is very encouraging. And so even though the state is diverse, we have basic needs that need to be met. We want to have a home, live the American dream. We want to be able to get to and from work affordably. We want the ability to have a retirement. And those are all the seeds and bounty that you have right here in Kern. So unfortunately, you have to fight for it, because we live in a state that has these diverse views and views that are very counter to your survival. So we want to make sure that message gets out and it connects with everyday Californians who live in all 58 counties. And that message needs to be delivered to them, and they need to call their legislators and say, I don't like this idea of a severance tax. You're going to cause my gas prices to go up, and I'm already commuting 25 or 30 miles to work, and I'm trying to raise 2 kids. So those are the challenges.
That's right.
Yeah.
I want to add to that, if I could. Is that possible?
Of course.
So I'm sitting here as Senator Gaines, he actually BOE member, but Senator Gaines speaking, and I look at the buttons on Vince's sleeve, and I look at the microphone and the plastic, and my cell phone with this plastic, and that chair, and that styrofoam cup, and that glass, and everything in here that is the soles of the bottom of your shoes. I think that even though we want to put out a message about the face of the industry, which is the positive message about the face of the industry and who works there and who it helps, we also need to go after the people in the Bay Area. You know, do you like your iPhone? Do you like the sheets that you sleep in? That alarm clock that you turn off in the morning? Do you like the tires on your car? Do you like the plastic chair use? I mean, whatever. I mean, petroleum products, a byproduct, to produce so many other products. So when you shut down the oil industry, are you going to be happy that you don't have these luxury items that the byproducts of the petroleum industry support? So in the Central Valley, and when you go up and speak to legislators, you could talk about the face of the industry and have that face very adequately represented. But then when you run commercials or you put together a public campaign, you need to talk about, you know, and just ask those questions. Do you like the glasses that you wear and the frames that are attached to those glasses? Do you like the, you know, when you talk about transportation and the stop signs and just everything that the petroleum industry touches, they need to know that they will lose those luxuries if this industry disappears.
Excellent point. Almost everything you're touching right now comes out of the petroleum business. And a fear I have is the emotions get in the way, and data and the facts actually become irrelevant in the conversation. So it all gets back to kind of what you're saying, which is civil discourse is a good thing, listening to the unintended consequences. So, Zach, we've talked a bit about regulations, and we've talked about broad effect of what's going on, and Shannon referred to a couple of regulatory opportunities that don't necessarily directly impact oil and gas, but bear with me, but they do. I mean, indirect. But for this particular audience, let's just talk a little bit about Dogger for a second, as an example, a kind of a poster child for this. And Dogger tries, I know a bunch of people, and maybe all you guys do, tries to do a very good job and understands its rules and its mandate. But there's a couple of, there's actually one bill in particular that's trying to take what I say, and I'm not a politician, by the way, so you can correct me, is take the legs out of Dogger by changing his mandate and this kind of thing. It changed a little bit because it's not, I think we've talked, it's going to have an impact if that passes in terms of how the operation. But you have a view kind of building off the themes that we've talked about and the panel has talked about supporting the regulatory environment, knowing what I said earlier, which I firmly believe, I think all of you do too, is that regulatory agencies are important. It's both sides of the conversation are required. It's a win-win situation if applied, if everybody follows the rules. So, love to hear your views.
Thanks. Well, I think that the environmental impact report that we completed back in 2015, and the ordinance that we put in place to do our permitting for the oil industry, a huge part of that was about supporting Dogger and supporting an environment where you have a streamlined process. You don't cut corners. I mean, that environmental impact study was massive, and it looked at the entire San Joaquin Basin. It studied water impacts, air quality impacts. The industry paid for that study, and it was very, very expensive to do, but the end result is creating a system where oil companies can come in and pull a permit in 7 days with a 3 business day review and get to work and put people to work. And we have issued since 2015 5,300 permits in that very fashion. Now, if you look at a situation where you're trying to drill on BLM land, good luck. That is a very difficult proposition. But what we've done in Kern County, even when you're looking at the very sensitive relationship between the surface owners and the mineral rights owners, that's a tough thing to navigate a lot of times between, say, a farmer that has an orchard and an oil company that has mineral rights underneath to come in. But we in Kern County found a way to make it work. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. But anytime when you're dealing with 2 competing interests, it's very hard to find perfection. And I think that we've gotten very, very close to that. But part of those regulations in that environmental impact study is about protecting the environment in a way that I think is very measurable. I talked about the $50 million in air quality mitigation that this industry has paid for, that this oil industry in Kern County has paid for over the course of those, 4 years, more than any industry in the entire valley. Road improvements, our maintenance fund, $4.8 million this industry has paid to maintain roads in Kern County. Our rural crimes unit, about $2.9 million going to the Sheriff's Department to support the rural crimes unit, which is critically important to not only the oil industry, but also to our farmers. And so those are the kinds of things that we have done in Kern that it is a benefit and a help to agencies like Dogger, but really it was about helping our most important industry. And when I call it the most important, I say that when you measure the contributions to our economy and to our tax base.
Great, very good. Ted, did you want to add to that with what's happening? No?
No, I think that.
Okay, great.
Well done.
You guys need to stand on that document. I know the EIR is not perfect, but you need to stand on that document. The Environmental Defense Fund and other organizations from like the Sierra Club and many other environmental organizations are trying to chip away at that document because they realize what it does. And although the document is not perfect, you need to stand on the document. What I mean by that is, like Dogger, we started off the subject matter for Dogger. Dogger is an industry-funded organization, so you guys fund that agency yourself. And now they're requiring you to provide an indemnification to Dogger if they issue you a permit, right? That was the latest thing that just happened. And now other agencies are adopting that. So if you get a water permit, you're going to indemnify the water agency. And it almost sounds completely absurd that you have to indemnify a state agency to give you a permit to produce the product that you guys are producing, or any other agency. But one of the things that we have to do is we have to stand on the document that the EIR, if you don't, if the county issues issues a permit and they ask for an indemnification clause, you lock the county in as your partner in order to proceed forward. And what they're trying to do is divide everybody so that they can chip away at this document that has issued, I don't remember the number, but hundreds of permits.
5,300.
5,300 permits, where you were waiting years. I mean, we all remember the Elena Miller days, right? Where we were waiting years for permits.
I don't think we speak her name in this.
So we all remember that time, right, when we were waiting years for permits, and now the permit process is streamlined. But I can tell you that they have not given up. The environmentalists continue to chip away or try to fight this document, and it's putting us more in a position, and if we start peeling off, then they win. So we have to stick together with what the county's produced. And maybe in the future, try to make it a better document, but right now we have to solidify it and wait for it to go through one more court process.
And I would just add that we need to track regulations just as we track bills. As we mentioned before, we're naming all these bills, and I'm sure a lot of you guys will read articles, and I'm sure your folks will list bills that have been introduced that we follow, that we need to either amend or stop or pass. But we don't provide that level of attention a lot of times to the regulations that the agencies do, and that's why we do need to provide a lot more oversight and accountability and transparency to the way these agencies operate, Dogger being one. Look, as Shannon mentioned, it is industry funded. So the resources go up, they hire more staff, and the permits go down. It sounds a whole lot like the DMV, right? Wait times go up, but they ask for more money and more staff. And that is the way that Sacramento operates, right? They're completely arrogant because they think they know best, and that the only solution to them is more money. But it's a management problem. And so we shouldn't give them any more money until they figure out what the problem is. And if there's a permit backlog, then tell us how they're going to fix it. But don't ask us for more money, and this is my personal opinion, I won't speak for the other legislators, right? Don't give them any more money until they tell us how they're going to fix the problem. And to me, that sounds pretty basic, right? But it's a challenge, and we need to put the pressure on these agencies to do their job. Californians expect them to function.
That goes back to elections. I'm just going to say that one more time, and I'm not trying to continue this discussion up here, but that goes back to elections. The budget is passed by 41 votes in the assembly. We have 19 people, okay? So if we want to hold up their money and we want to be able to impact how you guys are treated, that piece has to change. And the same on the Senate side. It has to change.
Okay, so get out and vote. By the way, your comment about it's not perfect as a document, there are very few documents that are perfect.
Exactly.
Okay? To have a win-win situation, everybody's got to give something, and you win mostly what you get. I hope there are no Russians in the room, but the Russian strategy in a meeting would be, I win or we both lose.
But sometimes it's better to have no deal than a bad deal.
Exactly. Many times. So, very good point. Ted, this question goes to you, and then I'm going to take a couple questions that I received from the audience. But as we do renewable...
You call me the equalizer.
Perfect. Excellent. All right. Well, I knew you'd take issue with that, but that's fair. With the renewables and the electric generation goals in the state, how are they going to get paid for it?
That's a great question. You've got exemptions related to solar, and I think the way they want to pay for it is to increase your taxes. So anybody that's getting a utility bill, you're going to see a higher bill coming your way. When we take a look at just the structure of the state of California and the philosophy that's in place, it's always at a cost to your pocketbook. We've got a number of things coming forward. an initiative in 2020 called Split Roll of Prop 13, which is going to subject every commercial property in the state of California valued over $2 million, and I think there's a caveat about maybe having to actually be a tenant in that building at the $2 million level. But basically an effort moving forward that was funded by Zuckerberg to get the signatures on the ballot. He kicked in $500,000 to get this split roll on the ballot. And it's going to tax Californians billions and billions in additional revenue. And so we have challenges. We've got the severance tax. We've got a challenge to Prop 13. The only reason they're not trying to take out all of Prop 13 is there's too many homeowners in California, so they don't want to touch the residential side. But we have to have our guard up, and we've got to be prepared. Discussions that I've had recently with John Copal of the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, he's working with property owners. They're talking about raising $100 million for the 2020 election cycle to defeat split roll. How does a doubling of your property tax impact you in Kern? How does that affect your bottom line, your rate of return? How does it affect a pension or insurance company that has real estate in the state and they're relying on a certain rate of return for pensioners or for shareholders? It's a scary prospect. It's a pathway towards socialism in terms of what's happening from a taxation standpoint, what's happening from a regulatory standpoint. We talked a little bit about, you touched on the change of the authority of the Board of Equalization. We used to have sales and use tax, and that was stripped away through legislation so that the government can have more power. The administration set up a whole new bureaucracy to hear your cases. And instead of going before elected individuals to hear a case on an appeal, if you're a small business owner, let's say you miscalculated your sales tax and you own a deli, you could represent yourself. You could come to the Board of Equalization and have your case heard. And maybe 1 in 10 cases would be in favor of that taxpayer, but at least you had your day in court. You didn't have to hire an attorney. Right now, with the new bureaucracy that has been set up, you now go before the Tax and Fee Administration in front of administrative law judges, and now it's maybe 1 in 100 cases that are in favor of the taxpayer. So how do we benefit when we see the growth of government, the growth of regulatory agencies, just as Vince was saying, where you don't have representation? So we've got to continue to fight to increase our numbers in the Assembly and in the Senate, but also just for basic representation when we have issues that come forward.
And with that, I'm getting the signal here.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay, but I do want to say that we did receive some questions from Jacob Panero of Varner Brothers. And
We don't take his questions. Okay.
Exactly, and I want to thank you for that. But there's one from Nathan Jones from Baker Hughes, one of the sponsors here, and it's kind of appropriate at the end because there'll be a big smile and a lot of laughter, but it's pretty serious, which is, how optimistic are you that the Republican Party ever gaining the executive branch again, or even a majority in the Senate or the Assembly in the state of California?
So I've been a Republican Senate leader
That'll be our
for
last
about
question, by the way.
15 days, maybe 17 days, and we've already put together a plan. I did it like a good CEO, right? A business owner, first female veteran, go in, look at what they're doing. I've had people come up to me because inertia is just sickening the way the process works. And they're like, we need $50,000 for this. Well, what's it for? Give me the ROI. Why are you doing this? Show me a budget. And then they'll come back to me a few days later and, hey, what happened to that project that we had to do? We're not going to do that project. So you just put good business practices and a lean process in politics. Now that's a foreign thing in the political arena, and we're trying to educate people that work up there in that process. I can tell you that we're really excited. Jessica Patterson just got elected as the CRP chair. She's the chairwoman, first Latina woman to ever serve on any statewide party. She's a millennial, so she can communicate with the younger generation who turned out in this past election cycle at over 46% increase, which is significant. It's the next generation that is going to show up at the polls. We have an open seat in SD5 where we have already recruited a candidate. We are working on things that we realized that went wrong. We did some data analytics on the last cycle and realized where the mistakes happened. One of the things that happened is there was one consultant that had 11 races. We had a candidate come that we've recruited to run, like I said, in SD5. He goes, I'm going to use this candidate. And I've been a little bit more direct. They're trying to teach me how to, they call it dating, like to date someone. Because I said, you hire that person, I won't give you a dime for your election. And they're like, well, you shouldn't do that. You should say, why don't we interview other candidates? I don't have time for that. Most of you that know me, you just have to do what needs to get done and move on to the next item. So we're going to do everything we can to clear the field so that we don't end up with a situation that we had where we lost a seat, where we had 6 or 7 Republicans and 1 Democrat. We are going to do everything we can to try to do what they've done in the past, try to pick our opponent, if that makes sense. And we are going to do everything we can to select candidates that look like their district, like Jesus Andrade in SD5 as the CEO of the Hispanic Chamber in that area. He is from the Charter School Association. He's got a great background. He is elected city council for the south side of Stockton, which is an area that we would traditionally lose. He will face Susan Eggman as the Democrat candidate. She is the person who introduced the bills to bring you safe injection sites so that when you go get your nails done or you go to the bookstore, the injection site next door where your drug-addicted individuals could come and get their color needles and be safely injected with the heroin of their choice and not be overdosed and have a taxpayer-funded individual watching them to make sure they do it safely. That's the Democrat world of solutions for drug abuse or drug, assisting people to get off drugs. So we are working hard to make sure that we recruit the right candidate for the right district. We are coming around, we're running around the state, we're raising money, and we are making sure that we draw a contrast to what they are doing in the building. For instance, the governor just came out on the capital punishment issue. It's constitutionally protected. The death penalty, it was overwhelmingly supported by the voters in the last cycle. And he says he's putting a moratorium on it. Well, that's a moratorium on individuals that have raped a 5-year-old boy, then caught him on fire and killed him, and this guy is sentenced to death, and he is not going to die when the state of California overwhelmingly approved for that individual that is definitely sick to die. There's other things that we're trying to draw contrasts with. SB 54, sanctuary state issues. You know, you have a lot of individuals. You have Officer Real Neil Singh. You've got the latest issue on the Bambi murder that just took place, where somebody was supposed to be deported almost, I think it was 7 times, and they're still in this country committing murder, and we cannot communicate with ICE. Officer Real Neil Singh was gunned down. That was a huge story as well. We're tracking all of those, and it's really sad that when you have those kinds of situations and you cannot communicate with other law enforcement that allows you to keep the public safe, and we are going to draw contrast with them, and they are giving us a lot of gifts that we will be able to use in the next election cycle. So yes, I am optimistic.
There you go. I was going to suggest that's exactly. That's all the time we have for the panel. And would you please join me in thanking the great discussion we just had.